Hello and welcome to the LGBTQ+ 2021 Seminar for History Month.
Visibility, connection and inclusion, brought to you by Surrey Police and our colleagues at Surrey County Council.
My name is Farhan Hyatt and I'm the Deputy Inclusion Lead for Surrey Police and also the Chair of the BME Staff Network, Space.
I'm James Ansell, a Detective Inspector here at Surrey Police, also part of the Surrey Police LGBT Staff Network.
We are so excited and honoured to be able to host a fantastic event for you today, which holds so much value for so many people. James, what does this mean to you?
So much, Farhan, so much. It's really difficult actually to put into words. Coming out as gay myself a good few years ago was a huge task in itself. And I think it's really important that we remember our community, our allies, and the history over time. I get to go into work and be in society and be the authentic me, but I know some people aren't quite so lucky or able to do that. So it's important we remember our history, do what we can to improve and make change, but also remember there is a long way to go on a local, national, and in fact global level, where there are still a lot of difficulties, a lot of archaic laws and things in place which prevent people from being their true self. What about you?
Absolutely. For me, James, the LGBTQ History Month really allows for a time to remember those in the world who still do not have the legal right to live their lives as their authentic self. And as an ally, to remember the histories of our friends and colleagues that was never taught to us at school. It allows for the platform to reflect on the struggles faced by the community and celebrate the achievements made that permit us to live in a fairer and more inclusive society today. Because as our t-shirts are saying, educate our prejudice.
Absolutely, that's spot on, Farhan. There's a lot to do to still promote inclusivity and equity within the workplace and our cultures and society. And yeah, shout out to Panda Squad Clothing Company that created these t-shirts for us. Just before we get started, everyone, we've got a lot of people online today. Firstly, a huge thank you for joining, taking time out of your day to do so. We're due to finish roughly on the 1 o'clock mark. You are shown on mute just to manage the large amount of people we do have in the audience. Cameras, great to see so many faces, is optional if you want to keep yours on or turn it off, but yeah, great to see you, so please keep them on if you'd like to. There is the comments box, which our colleague Rachel will be monitoring, so put any questions, comments in there. We'll get back to you as soon as we can, probably after this event. It is being recorded and it will be shared internally with subtitles afterwards. That'll be available to you. We'll also be sending around a fact/evaluation sheet feedback to you, so please get back to us on that. We are in the virtual world. It does have its difficulties. So if there are any issues, please bear with us. We will reconnect and get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
James, we've got some amazing guest speakers today. I'm so excited about the lineup that we've got. Obviously, opening for us today, we've got our PCC Police Crime Commissioner, David Monroe, and Katie Stewart from Surrey County Council, followed by Julie Bentley, an old friend of mine from the Samaritans, the Chief Executive for the Samaritans UK. Following Julie, we're going to have Temporary Commander Clinton Blackburn, who's also the UK LGBTQ+ Network co-chair. After Mr. Blackburn, we are going to be joined by Di Stiff from Surrey History Centre, as well as Robin Snook, the founder of the LGBTQ+ Network for Surrey County Council. And following this, there'll be Stephen Ireland, the founder of Pride in Surrey, and who really headed up our first ever Pride in Woking in 2019. Following Stephen, we'll be joined by PC Louise Worsfold from Metropolitan Police. And then finally, I can't even believe I'm saying this, but we're going to be joined by Peter Tatchell, an amazing man who's done so much for the LGBTQ+ community in the UK.
Absolutely, some incredible guest speakers there we've got from. Really excited to hear from some inspirational people there. And on that note, whet our appetite, let's go into it. If you can share that video of the man himself, Mr. Tatchell, and where some things began.
I was one of about 30 or 40 people that helped organise and publicise the first ever Gay Pride Parade in Britain, which took place in London in July 1972. We were very uncertain about who'd turn up, if anyone. In those days, most LGBT people were in the closet. They weren't open about their sexuality. They wouldn't dare show their faces publicly. Plus, many people felt there was a threat of violence from members of the public, or even the possibility of arrest by the police. We were pleasantly surprised that nearly 1,000 people turned out on that first Pride Parade, which has had very much a carnival atmosphere, but also a very strong political message about human rights and equality as well. I'd say in terms of public reactions, it roughly divided. About a third of the public were quite viciously hostile. We had coins and bottles thrown at us, all kinds of outrageous, abusive insults. But there was another third who just gawped in amazement. They were just dumbfounded that gay people would dare show their faces. But they weren't hostile. The other third were actually supportive. That really surprised us. More people than we expected were supportive. They cheered and clapped. They said, "Good on you." That was very, very encouraging. But the police presence was another thing. There was almost a police officer for every single marcher. They hemmed us in. Some officers openly shouted homophobic abuse at us. Of course, in those days, there was no redress. The police could get away with it. They treated us like criminals. And of course, in those days, in many aspects of gay life, were still criminalised. There'd been a partial decriminalisation of homosexuality in 1967, but in the years afterwards, the number of gay and bisexual men convicted for consenting behaviour increased by nearly 400%. There was a real police witch hunt, and that was reflected in the way that we were treated by the police on that parade. But we didn't let that dampen our spirits. We were joyful and defiant. And we did that march, we celebrated, we finished off with a gay day, a picnic in Hyde Park, where we played party games, like Spin the Bottle and Oranges and Lemons, all given with a queer twist, of course. We kissed in defiance, and I can remember looking at the police, and there were just lines of police, not exactly surrounding us, they were standing a distance back, with their arms folded, looking very, very aggressive and hostile. But they didn't dare arrest us because there were so many. But we were afraid of being arrested, because in those days, kissing in public between people of the same sex was regarded as a criminal offence. And you could be arrested, fined, taken to court, convicted and fined, or even possibly jailed. How things have changed. What an amazing trajectory we've been on, where over the years, pride has grown and grown and grown. Right up until 1987, it never reached beyond 15,000 people. But then in 1988, the Conservative government passed Section 28, which prohibited the so-called promotion of homosexuality and the promotion of same-sex relationships as, quote, a pretended family relationship. Well, that was the bomb under gay pride. That motivated many people who had never ever attended, who never dared show their face, to come out. So that year, pride jumped from 15,000 to 30,000, and it's been growing ever since.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, James and Farhan, for inviting me. It's a real honour. I don't envy you your tasks of keeping us all to time over the next two hours. So I wish you the best of luck. It's been an amazing journey for myself as Police and Crime Commissioner. When I went to Santos, Royal Military Academy, in 1966, aged 18, I wouldn't have believed I'd be here, 50 years later. Let me tell you a story about those times, because nobody knew I was gay at the time. How could they? I'd have been sacked before nightfall. I was a year later, I found myself in Germany on exercise, age 19. One of my friends, he was just a friend, was caught in flagrante. With another cadet. Obviously that was an offence at the time. It still is an offence, actually, that sort of thing on duty. And he was flown back to the headquarters Royal Military Academy, not far from me at Camberley. And they were both treated very kindly. And that, of course, was very ominous indeed, because the hangmen are always kind to the people they're about to execute. And I met up with Ian several years later, actually, both at the same university, and asked him what his experience was. They treated him as though he was ill. He's a healthy, very fit 19-year-old like me, but he was made to get into pajamas and stay in bed in the cottage hospital while they frantically decided what to do with him. His discharge papers arrived 3 days later and he was gone. And he thought that I had, of coming out of the closet, had to wait another 41 years after that. And it was increasingly difficult as I moved up the ranks. I ended up as a major. People were asking me why I didn't get married. And the truthful answer, of course, was, well, my boyfriend wouldn't like it. He's now my civil partner. But that was obviously not something I could do. What a sea change there has been only in the last 15 years. I was a Tory until quite recently, now an independent. Tories were not gay friendly until recently. And I pay tribute to David Cameron for almost single-handedly doing a lot to remove that prejudice, although some of it is still there. So that's my journey. It's not a journey of heroism against the odds. It's not a Peter Tatchell journey and everybody who were the trailblazers, but it is a journey of someone who really didn't feel at home with themselves for decades and decades. And at last, things are changed. We all know there's things more to do. I'm proud to belong to Surrey Police. I think they've got it. I think you all have got it. But we all know, of course, that that journey hasn't ended. Over to Katie Stewart, Surrey County Council.
Thank you so much, David. And I'm absolutely delighted and also not just a bit humbled to be here today with what is a truly inspiring lineup of speakers, as we've already seen. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Executive Director for Environment, Transport and Infrastructure at Surrey County Council. But perhaps a bit more exciting, I am the corporate lead for equalities, diversity and inclusion for the council, and also the very proud sponsor of our LGBTQ+ staff network, the chair of whom, the very brilliant Robin Snook, is going to be speaking later on the agenda, as we've already seen. You might ask, why am I particularly proud? I have to say it's not because I think we've done a particularly brilliant job in EDI. That might surprise you. And I certainly don't think we've done a particularly brilliant job yet, specifically for our staff or our residents in the LGBTQ+ community. Far from it. I think we have some really challenging history. And to this day, I can share that unconscious bias still affects parts of our organization, certainly parts of our community. And we do not have a workforce that is truly representative of our community at all levels, nor are we reaching all of our communities as we should. No, I'm actually proud because I think we're facing up to those challenges as honestly as possible. Our members, our corporate leadership team, along with officers right across the organization, have committed to doing so in as authentic and open a way as possible. It is somehow fitting that this month, a reflection and celebration of the LGBTQ+ community, is the month when our cabinet will be considering a proposed radical action plan for EDI for the council that in itself is going to help us to deliver on our organizational strategy, that at its very heart has a very simple tenet, that no one is left behind. So really proposing to put inclusion at the heart of how we work, and supporting that, a celebration of diversity and a commitment to pursuing and fighting for equality where it is not. I have to say we have a long way to go. All right, we have got a lot of learning to do, all who work for the organization, members and officers alike, and we're committed to that. And that is why a month like this is so important. Opportunity. This month gives us an opportunity to really reflect on the very real, the very recent, and therefore still very raw experience, as we've already heard, and the struggle of the LGBTQ+ community in this county, this country, and indeed abroad. Now, you'll notice from my accent that I'm not actually from around here. I'm not Canadian, so I'm actually American. And it's actually, again, something that I'm quite proud of. And I have to admit, it's not because of recent political leadership that I believe has set America back so many steps in the fight for equality, but because we actually have a rich tradition of activism and of speaking out, not backing down when there is a good fight to be had. The Stonewall riots, which are so important to the LGBTQ+ community around the world, were a brilliant expression of this. The riots triggered a bold new era for the LGBTQ+ community in seeking equal rights and in celebrating, rather than hiding, homosexuality, and gender nonconformity. From the police raid on a small gay-friendly bar, the Stonewall Inn, in Greenwich Village in New York City on the 28th of June, 1969, and the events that unfolded, giving rise to the first gay pride events in 1970, and as we've already heard today, the first gay pride event in Britain in 1972. But even reflecting on the huge steps forward that those protesters and those activists made in those events of the late 60s and 70s, there would be several more decades, as we've already heard, of discrimination to fight through. The stigmatism inflicted on the LGBTQ plus community in the 1980s in the context of the AIDS epidemic, the shameful passing in 1988 of Section 28 of the Local Government Act, which, as we've already heard, prohibited the promotion of homosexuality by local authorities, and specifically the teaching of the acceptability of homosexuality as a, quote, pretended family relationship in maintained schools, which of course left a generation and the next to feel somehow less human or decent than what were considered their more traditional heterosexual neighbors, friends, and relatives. And those impacts are still being felt today. Now, for me, I'm ashamed to say that this, I only recently found out this was only repealed in 2003. So in many of our lifetimes, and worse still, there was actually a debate within Surrey County Council as to whether to actually extend Section 28 at the time. Fortunately, although nearby Kent County Council actually did introduce its own version, Surrey never did. However, that there was even support for this kind of policy in many of our lifetimes means that in our memories, there were parts of the community that would see discrimination as legitimate, a fact that we can't avoid, we can't shy away from it, one that we have to recognize, learn from, and understand that it means we have to do so much more than we ever thought might be necessary to ensure that the LGBTQ plus community and our staff don't feel left behind. So we are on a very long, a very challenging, but a very, very important journey to true equality. And that still continues to this day. This is the good fight. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you today to celebrate those that came before us. And with you, we will work to make further strides toward that true equality. So thank you so much for joining us here today. And thank you for the opportunity to join you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Monroe and Katie. Thanks for your input there, and thanks for joining us today. I think you've really summarised a lot of key, rich, important history there, but also a lot of thoughts and what we need to do for the future and why it's important. Thank you very much for sharing that. For those of you that don't know, each year there's a theme to the LGBT plus History Month, and this year it's all about mind, body and spirit. And I appreciate that's going to mean something different to every person online now. But for me, I look at the basis of that and just think, do you know what? We need to look after ourselves, look after our peers, our colleagues, our friends, and just people we come into contact with, look after and look out for each other. We also remember during this seminar, 5 different faces throughout the years, people that have been really key, inspirational to the community. And the first one we're going to move on to now is Lily Parr, and Farhan will take over here.
Lillian Parr was an English Professional Association football player who has played as a winger. She is best known for playing for the Dick Cares ladies team, which was founded in 1917 and based in Preston, Lancashire. As a girl, Parr displayed little enthusiasm for traditional pursuits such as sewing and cookery. Instead, her fearless streak and robust frame allowed her to compete alongside boys in football. Lily eventually stopped working in the Dick Care & Co factory and trained as a nurse, working at Whittingham Hospital. Whilst working at the hospital, Lily met her partner Mary, and together they bought a house in Preston. Although it was socially unacceptable to be a lesbian at the time, and many lesbian couples went to great lengths to conceal their relationships, Lily and Mary refused to hide. Lily is therefore celebrated as an LGBTQ plus icon, as well as a footballing icon. Lily died of breast cancer in 1978 and is buried in St Helens. She was the first woman to feature in the National Football Museum's Hall of Fame in 2002, and in 2019, a life-size statue of her was erected outside the museum.
Okay, and the second face that we remember is Mr. Mark Ashton. He was born on the 19th of May, 1960. He was a British gay rights activist and co-founder of the Lesbian and Gays Support the Minors support group. He was a member of the Communist Party of Great Britain and General Secretary of the Young Communist League. Ashton was born in Oldham and moved to Portrush, County Antrim, Northern Ireland, where he grew up and he studied at the former Northern Ireland Hotel Catering College in Portrush, before moving to London in 1978. Ashton volunteered with the London Lesbian and Gay Switchboard, supported the campaign for nuclear disarmament and joined the Young Communist League. In 1983, he featured in the Lesbian and Gay Youth Video Project film Framed Youth, The Revenge of the Teenage Perverts, an early documentary that won the Grierson Award 1984 for Best Documentary. Ashton also became involved in the Red Wedge Collective and became the General Secretary of the Young Communist League from 1985 to 1986. Diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, Ashton was admitted to Guy's Hospital on the 30th of January 1987 and sadly died 12 days later. His death prompted a significant response from the gay community, particularly in publication and attendance at his funeral at Lambeth Cemetery. In his memory, the Mark Ashton Trust was created to raise money for individuals living with HIV, and as of 2007, it's raised £20,000. Since 2008, the Terence Higgins Trust has included the Mark Ashton Red Ribbon Fund, which has collected more than £38,000 as of 2017. Mark Ashton is also remembered on a panel on the UK AIDS Memorial Quilt and has been memorialised in May 2014 on a plaque at the entrance to the London headquarters of the Terence Higgins Trust.
Thank you, James. I am now really honoured to be handing over to a friend, an ex-colleague, and also a fantastic person, Julie Bentley, who is the Chief Executive of the Samaritans. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Farhan. It's really lovely to be here. I'm delighted to join you all today. Thanks for having me. So, Samaritans was established in 1953 with one man and a telephone. And it's since grown into a network of over 20,000 extraordinarily amazing and dedicated volunteers across the UK and Ireland, and offers life-threatening services, life-saving, services 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. It's widely recognised how important it is to talk, but what tends to get less attention is that when we need to open up, there must be someone there to listen. That's where Samaritans comes in. We've been here to listen to people's innermost thoughts, worries, anxieties for almost 70 years. And in that time, we've had to evolve how we work in order to make sure that we can be there to support people that need us the most. As an organisation that is focused on suicide prevention and the reduction of death by suicide, we realised that we couldn't just be there as that emergency last point of contact. We needed to be there much earlier on for people, to be a place to go when people just needed to get things off their chest and before issues can develop into something much more serious. And just as we have changed as Samaritans, society, of course, has also changed and evolved. And it's brought significant advances in equality. But, and it's hard to say it actually, and really even harder to comprehend, when Samaritans was founded, as we've already heard today, you weren't allowed to get married if you were gay, you weren't allowed to serve in the military if you were gay, and in fact, just being gay was a crime itself, as was indeed taking your own life at the time. Thankfully, some things, of course, have changed, and some of those wrongs have been righted. But for many in the LGBTQ+ community, issues do remain. Trans rights are still felt to be tenuous, and often there is very angry and public exchange and discourse on the subjects. And that has serious consequences for mental health and well-being of trans people, especially young trans people. So while things have changed legally, the lived reality for many people in the LGBTQ+ community, and especially people of colour and disabled people, is still often one of discrimination or hostility or isolation. And this can make things even worse for people who are needing support. And there are some quite sobering statistics on this. A UK survey found that 4 in 5 trans people had experienced suicidal thoughts at some point in their life. That is simply not good enough, is it? And in 2018, a Stonewall survey found that 2% of LGBT people and 12% of trans people had reported attempting suicide in the last year. And rates of that were higher for young people aged 16 to 24. The reasons behind this are complicated, but as well as experiencing the same risk factors for suicide as heterosexual and cisgender people, many people from LGBTQ+ communities face additional pressures which increase their suicide risk. These include the lingering discrimination and stigma that we know there already is in society and continues to be in society, and conflicts resulting from coming out to others have also been linked to exacerbated issues. And we know that the trans community faces enormous challenges in relation to things such as transitioning and challenges also of accessing gender services, and all of this adds to the burden that people carry. It's more important than ever then that LGBTQ+ community feels that they are not alone and that they have friends and allies. Sometimes being there for someone is really as simple as listening. That's what Samaritans volunteers are doing every time they pick up the phone or they answer an email or a web chat, being an ally to someone in distress. I was reading an interesting article in Women's Hour article recently, and it was about a woman who was reflecting on an incident where she had been called out online about an article that she'd written. And she said, a good ally is someone who doesn't centre themselves and someone who does more listening than talking. And that really struck a chord with me. That's what Samaritans does. And in my own journey through life and through leading various charities across the charity sector, I have tried hard to be an ally. And I think I still, like all of us, have more that we could learn to do better. But for example, when I was the chief executive at Girl Guiding, when I arrived there, I found that lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people seemed to be invisible in the organisation, in the staff and volunteers. People weren't openly out, and we had no profile at events such as Pride. So I decided that we needed to do something to address this, and I began by announcing to the organisation that we would go to Brighton Pride and just to invite any of our young members or our volunteers who wanted to join us to come along. And at that very first one, it was a very small collection of Girl Guiding people who came along to Brighton that day, a real small handful. But as we marched in the parade, an extraordinary thing happened because the response from the crowd and the audience was amazingly supportive. They were delighted to see Girl Guiding there. And at the end of the day, one of our volunteers, who was an older woman in her late 60s and had volunteered with the organisation for over 30 years, came up to me and she said, I want to say to you, Julie, that Girl Guiding is absolutely my passion in my life. But today, as a gay woman, this is the first time I have 100% been myself in Girl Guiding. And that, for me, told me that we needed to keep on with that journey. And I'm absolutely delighted that now, 9 or 10 years on from that, Girl Guiding is represented at national and local prides on a very, very regular basis across the country. But we also at Girl Guiding made clear that trans young people and volunteers were of course welcome in Girl Guiding. And whilst that attracted a lot of negative media, we were really clear that those young people in our membership who were questioning their gender identity absolutely needed a safe space to do that. At Samaritans, we're committed to a non-judgmental approach and being there for everybody who needs us. And when I'm asked what our priorities are for the months and years to come, I always say that going further to ensure we are fully inclusive to those who want to volunteer with us, to those who want to work with us, and to those people who want to call us and need our support. Inclusion and access is at the heart of what we're going to be doing in the next few years. And being an organisation that represents the full spectrum of our diverse society is our aim. And in fact, today's session is really good timing because back at the ranch at Samaritans, our focus this month is on looking at equality, diversity and inclusion. And we've got a series of workshops going on at the moment, running virtual events around the different topics. But of course, it isn't just Samaritans that provide support in relation to LGBTQ+. There are other organisations and services out there. For example, Stonewall, Mindline, Trans Plus and the Kaleidoscope Trust, who are all doing really vital work to support LGBTQ people, both in the UK and internationally. LGBTQ+ issues are society's issues, and we all must work together as allies, confidants, colleagues, and cheerleaders. And we need to continue the fight for equality and inclusion for all. We have made real progress, but we aren't there yet. We've still got much to do. Thanks ever so much for listening. And I now get to introduce, much to my pleasure, Temporary Commander Clinton Blackburn and co-chair of the LGBTQ National Police Network. Over to you.
So, thank you very much for inviting me. What I want to do is talk to you about two things really. I'm going to give you a sort of 5 minutes about me and my background and kind of where I got to in policing. And then I'm going to talk to you about the National LGBT plus network. So I joined policing back in 1992, so 29 years ago. I joined a county force at that time. My first posting was out to a sort of a rural police station, albeit a busy division. And back in those days, there was no real role models. For those of you that are old enough in the audience, and I recognise a few faces there, so some of you I know are old enough for it, but you had Kenny Everett, you had Larry Grayson, and they were all sort of people, whilst they were funny and comical on TV, they weren't sort of necessarily people that I felt that I could associate with as what I knew there was as a gay man. I joined the police still with a girlfriend for the first six months, but I kept that lie going for probably about 3 or 4 years, and would speak about Debbie, who was my girlfriend at the time. Sorry, Debbie, wherever you are, because I used her as an excuse for probably about the next 3 or 4 years. But basically what happened when I went into policing, I felt very isolated very, very quickly, because obviously going back to a very different era to what it is now, thankfully. And what I did, I made quite a conscious decision quite early on in my career to continue that lie, and ended up isolating myself. So I would try and pick areas that I would patrol on where you'd be single crewed, so you wouldn't be stuck in a car with somebody for 12 hours. I would take jobs where I could isolate myself and I wasn't part of a team member. And I did that for 10 years. And as when I sort of think back, whilst I loved my job and I was, reasonably okay at doing it, what I found actually when I look back now, I spent most of my time actually concentrating, actually covering the lies that I was telling and making sure the lie that I reflected on that current day reflected the previous lies I told everybody before. And that became a real thing. And I perhaps didn't realise actually the stresses and pressures it was putting me under. We then had another chap who was a chap by the name of Phil, who was a patrol officer, who always used to feel it was okay just to sort of drop by my house whilst I was on patrol for a couple, as you often do. And again, that has real impacts. I was at that time living with my partner, who was male. And I think on the second occasion of him having to go over the garden fence and go and walk around the estate for a couple of hours, and on the second occasion it was in the rain, we had a real sort of conversation to say actually enough was enough, and actually perhaps felt at that point it wasn't a place for me in policing. I then sort of plucked up the courage that I thought, I think I'll start by telling my family. And I was actually looking for other jobs at the time. And one day my mum came round to my house and said to me, I've got something to ask you. So I kind of thought, great, here's my moment. I think she's obviously twigged. And actually her question was, how do you feel about having a gay sister? So I thought, crikey, so now someone else has beat me to it. And Heidi, my sister, who's 2 years younger, comes out, which actually put me back in the closet, if that makes sense. Anyway, I made a conscious decision. I moved away from the county that I lived. It was fixed one problem. And then I took myself off and was interviewed for Virgin Airlines as cabin crew, because I thought I'm going to get out of the police and do something different. Anyway, they make you stand up in front of 30 people and sing a song by Cliff Richards, which was We're All Going on a Summer Holiday. And actually, when I look back now, as comical as it sounds, I'm sure they're not so sure who was more traumatised by that, either the 30 crew that had to listen to it or me that had to sing it. If I'm really honest, still feel scarred by it. Anyway, I thought to myself, you know what, I'm not leaving policing, I'm going to give it another go. And what I did was I actually transferred down to a London force. And actually from that moment, when I transferred, came out, I never actually ever looked back ever again. And actually it was a really good defining moment for me. And I'm not one to feel sorry for myself. I wouldn't change any bit of my life. I enjoyed the first 10 years of my career. It was a moment in time. But I kind of guess the things it taught me was actually that when you do come out, actually it isn't really a big thing. You make it a big thing yourself, I think, as well as obviously other people who create that environment where you feel you can't be yourself. But I started to progress as a result of that. And after 10 years, eventually started to get promoted. And obviously over the next 17, I've worked myself up to where I am at the moment. But I think what the key to that and how it links into the next bit is a bit actually what it really did was it inspired me to help others. And actually I realised as I started to go up the ranks that actually as you look down, that there was some people that had some real significant issues and struggles, and actually as line managers, senior managers, role models, champions, you all have a part to play in actually making the environment the right place for people to work and achieve. And actually what I then went on to do is I ran a couple of networks. One obviously was in Surrey and one in the previous force and the force that I'm in at the moment. as well as worked for the Superintendents Association as the reserved LGBT member, sort of advising on national policy before they're moving into this current position that I am, where I've been for the last 2 years as the co-chair for the national network. So I'll give you a little bit of a brief history on what I do and how it helps certainly colleagues in policing, but again, it's open to other colleagues in Surrey County Council, for example, in terms of best practice. So we had something called the GPA, Gay Police Association, that ran up until about 2014. To look back, probably a little bit of a boys' network, I think back in those days, very London-centric, predominantly run by men, and it had been around for a number of years and did some really good work. But it collapsed in 2014. In 2015, there was a realisation, I think, across the landscape that there was a real gap starting to appear in LGBT, and it's starting to sort of fall into the background, and other areas were becoming more of a priority. So the national network was set up, and it came into being, and has a really, really strong structure, actually quite an enviable one, and it's based on the sort of Superintendents Association model, where the country is carved up into regions, and then each region will have 6 police forces that sit underneath that. And then an elected regional rep will be the person that sits around the table at the national network. And what we do, the organisation will meet quarterly. It'll have a website which you can have a look at, which is www.lgbtpolice.uk. But I would urge you to have a look at that because it's really informative and it's got some lots of useful stuff on there, and that's open to anybody, not just policing. We have the NPCC leads, that's the National Chief Officer who leads on the portfolio for LGBT, Julie Cook, very passionate, very driven, and drives a lot of the activity of that organisation. But one of the things that I'm really keen on, whilst it's good to sort of come together and listen to issues and things that people are doing around the country, is I did not want it to be a talking shop. And actually what I did want was people to deliver some tangible things that were going to make change both for LGBT community and for those that are working within policing. And what we have done is each of those regional leads now has a lead for a specific area. So the London region, for example, has a lead for LGBT liaison officers, advisors, LAGLOs, as you all call them in Surrey. You'll have another part of the country that's leading on LGBT and domestic abuse, youth engagement. So there's lots of different themed areas. And the idea behind that is that each of those regions will produce a toolkit, which will be loaded onto the website, which you obviously can tap into. And what we're trying to do by that is create some uniformity across policing. So if I was a victim of male rape, for example, in London, I could expect to get the same response. If I was to move to Surrey tomorrow, that crime be picked up by that force. What we've also done to support it, and I'll be very quick, and I'm running out of time, but we're doing some work around intersexuality at the moment, as we realise there's a lot of strands and diversity crosses many different protected characteristics, and we just can't put people into one box. And so we're doing some work around that. But the other area that I really wanted to make sure we supported was because I think from my experience, you'll find there's a lot of passionate people that run networks and deliver, diversity teams. And they'll do a really, really good job, and the organisation will support them in the work that they're doing. But they sometimes don't get the senior support that they need. So what we wanted to do was put in a senior champion to make sure that those people that were working in those fields were supported. So we've introduced senior champions now to every police force. Clive Davies, hopefully he's online today, is Surrey's champion, and I know I'm doing an excellent job. But the idea about that is about driving change, and then what we'll do to support that on the 17th of May is we're going to launch another action plan which will link into the National Chief Police Council's diversity and inclusion plan, but it will give again some continuity across all forces and be asking all forces to do the same thing specifically around LGBT, so we can really start to make things move. I think if I had one message to all of you, I think don't ever think you don't make a difference or you can't make any change, because you absolutely will. If I think back, if I'd seen all the role models that exist now across policing, or any other agency, it doesn't really matter who you work for, if they'd have existed back then, I probably wouldn't have even transferred forces. And trust me, from conversations I've had, there are people that absolutely will be thinking that within your organisations now, and will be looking to see, actually, do I feel comfortable here, yes or no? And if it's a simple no, they will go, and you will lose good people. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So thank you very much for your time. I'd love to speak to you for longer. I hope the rest of the event goes really well. Thank you for arranging. The one thing I do have a really fond memory of Surrey was one place where I actually felt really inclusive. And from the position that I sit, nationally, I get a lot of eyes over a lot of police forces. And out of the 3 that I've worked in, you were absolutely kicking it. And I think you actually should do some great work. We're very proud of what you're achieving. On that note, I'd like to hand over to our friends at Surrey County Council, which is Di Stiff from the Surrey History Centre, and Robin Snook, who's the chair of the LGBT network. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clinton. Thank you, guys. My name's Di Stiff. I'm the Collections Development Archivist at Surrey History Centre in Woking. I specialise in developing our collections and have a long-held passion for making Surrey's diverse history more visible and accessible. I'm also an ally for our staff LGBTQI+ network. Surrey History Centre in Woking is run by Surrey County Council to collect and preserve the written heritage of the county and its people from the 12th century to the present day. And our collections document the county's rich and remarkable past. And we're open to anyone wanting to trace the history of their house, their family, their community, or just undertake research. The archive contains 6 million documents occupying 6 miles of shelving in our climate-controlled strong rooms. And these include manuscripts, rare books, maps, photographs, illustrations, cine-film, modern-day digital formats, all of which form the written memory of Surrey stretching back some 900 years. History really matters to people. It's a living, dynamic thing. It's not just old documents in the past. It's about capturing people's struggles, their successes, their everyday working and family lives, and all of this can be found in our archive collections. In normal times, we would hold events and activities, but during lockdown closure, we've had to create podcasts using material in the archives to get our stories out to people in a different way, including one for LGBT+ History Month about Alan Turing, which you can find on our Exploring Surrey's Past website. And I'll put the links in the chat after my talk. Most of us know Alan Turing as a wartime codebreaker and the founder of modern computing, but his connections with Surrey are less well known. Our archives help document an important part of his life. Alan's first proper home was Ennismore Avenue in Guildford, where he lived from the age of 15. The family would go for long walks in Stoke Park and up on the North Downs. Fascinated by astronomy, Alan would spend hours stargazing and drawing the night sky. He continued to visit the family home whilst he was at university. Alan's brother John and his family lived in Jenner Road, Guildford, and Alan would visit them and delight his nieces by solving cracker puzzles at Christmas. After the war, Alan lived in Hampton and was a member of the Walton Athletics Club. He often ran the 18 miles between there and his brother's house. Alan was actually a world-class marathon runner, coming 5th in the trials for the 1948 Olympics. Alan never concealed his sexuality from his friends, and his last visit to Guildford was at Christmas 1953. This was 6 months before his untimely death, following his prosecution for gross indecency under the archaic 1885 Criminal Law Amendment Act and the chemical hormone treatment that he had submitted to in lieu of imprisonment. Turing is commemorated locally in road names at G Live and with a sculpture at the University of Surrey campus. Turing said, "Sometimes it is the people no one can imagine anything of who do the things no one can imagine. And it's thanks to him that following his own posthumous pardon, thousands of gay men in England and Wales who were cautioned or convicted under historical legislation have also been exonerated." There is now a blue plaque on the Turing House in Ennismore Avenue, and I think it's inspiring that our county has a tangible link with one of the greatest figures of the 20th century. And after lockdown lifts, you can literally walk in Alan's footsteps with local expert Paul Backhouse and the Guildford Town Guides on one of their Turing walks. Surrey is blessed with many famous LGBTQ+ connections. We use the unique treasures in our collections to highlight these stories and make them visible online all year round. For example, the poet J.R. Ackerley and the actors Dirk Bogarde and Noel Coward all served with the Surrey regiments, for which we hold the records. Actors Denholm Elliott, John Gielgud and the writer Robert Graves all attended Surrey schools. The authors E.M. Forster, Beverley Nichols and Terence Rattigan made Surrey their home, as did the gay composer Dame Ethel Smythe, and not least, Edward Carpenter, the founding father of gay rights in the UK. All of these stories are on our Exploring Surrey's Past website, along with research guides, blogs, and examples of our LGBTQ+ research work. But it's not all about being queer and famous. And it's important that we highlight life stories of ordinary LGBTQ+ people in history. Many of these people did not always have a public life, and unsurprisingly, there are areas where little is known and even less written about. One Surrey exception is Harry Daly, who lived and died in Dorking and joined the Metropolitan Police in 1925. Harry realised he was gay at an early age, and he was always open about his sexuality. He met the novelist E.M. Forster, who was then living in Abinger-Hammer, and for 6 years they were lovers. Although Forster found Harry worryingly indiscreet and feared he'd get them arrested. Despite being a policeman, Harry never was arrested. However, he bore hurtful homophobic jibes masked as jokes from his fellow officers. But because he used humour as a foil and he was one of their own, he was tolerated. Harry died in 1971 and his ashes were scattered on Box Hill. He left us with a beautifully written and eye-wateringly honest manuscript memoir, which we hold in the archives, which was posthumously published as This Small Cloud. And you can watch our Pride podcast about Harry Daly and his extraordinary life on our Exploring Surrey's Past website. So we believe that stories like Harry's need to reach a wider audience. It stimulates interest, it promotes research, and it encourages further records to be placed with us in the archive for future generations. And that's really important. It also helps build a bigger and more accurate picture of the actual lived experience of LGBTQ+ people in Surrey. Lesbian life is almost invisible in the archives. Dame Ethel Smythe, who was a significant female composer of the early 20th century, is a rarity among our collections, and we hold a huge research resource relating to her life. Dame Ethel was a woman who loved other women, and she wrote about it. She too was open about her sexuality, describing it as an everlasting puzzle. She spent most of her life in Woking, and her published memoirs chart her infatuations and passions, including with Emmeline Pankhurst and Virginia Woolf, and the American writer Henry Brewster. Dame Ethel was also a suffragette, imprisoned for the cause, and she penned the rousing battle anthem, The March of the Women. She defied convention, she was ballsy, determined, and I'm delighted that she will soon be memorialised in Woking Town Centre with a statue. Making our collections relevant and representative of all Surrey's communities is crucial. In 2009, seeing there was a gap in our collections, we began working with local LGBTQ+ support organisations and individuals to make sure that their records and evidence of the vital work they were doing was preserved in our archives. As a result, the records of Gay Surrey, Outline, Gyres, the trans education charity, and Guildford Area Gay Society have been placed with us. And some of their websites are now digitally archived through the British Library. Guildford Area Gay Society, or GAGS as they were known, were one of the earliest regional support groups in the South East, formed in 1977 out of the Guildford branch of the Campaign for Homosexual Equality. GAGS members attended the early Pride marches in London, and their homemade banner, which you can see here, is part of their archive, providing a very tangible link with early queer activism. Coming right up to date, Pride in Surrey are now working with us to collate their own archive. So not every archive is lucky to have a Gentleman Jack diary. And when we look at our collections, we need to understand whose voices we are not hearing, and we need to act upon that knowledge. The public can help us to amplify those voices through our campaign to attract more LGBTQ+ material into the archives. It's called What's Your Surrey LGBTQ+ Story. We have a duty to make sure that the story of same-sex love and diversity of past lived experiences is preserved, and we hope people will place with us records relating to everyday life. Personal records such as memoirs, diaries, photographs, letters, poems, film, or artistic works are all ways in which we can ensure Surrey's LGBT+ history is not lost or kept buried. And you don't have to identify as LGBTQ+ to contribute. You may have witnessed prejudice or experienced the effects of working with Section 28, or you may have a family perspective. All of those memories are just as valued to add to the archives. And it sounds cheesy, but today's experiences are tomorrow's history. So if you'd like to add something, then we'd love to hear from you. And full details of this campaign are on our Exploring Surrey's Past website. Looking back 10 years, we've made significant strides in preventing an important area of Surrey's history from being glossed over, hidden or straightwashed by making it more visible and accessible. Of course, there is more to do. LGBTQ+ lives have long been overlooked, ignored and covered up. And it's not about retrospectively outing the dead, and you can't project 21st century judgment onto past lives, but acknowledging that people took great pains to hide their true identity is really key to understanding why LGBTQ+ history doesn't always exist and why we are trying to redress the balance. So using the archives, we can help people see the diversity in Surrey's history and embrace the nuances that make people different. And this can go a long way in helping change negative views, and that in itself can help feed into the fight against hate crime and homophobia.
Michael Dillon was born in 2015, the second child of an Irish baronet. Assigned female at birth, he took an early interest in masculinity. At Oxford University, he became president of the Women's Boat Club and was already presenting in a masculine fashion. After graduation, Dillon got work near Bristol. A local GP, George Foss, was experimenting with a new drug, testosterone, but it had unfortunate side effects for women patients. Dillon thought those side effects were just what he needed. Foss gave Dillon a further supply of testosterone, but declined to continue treatment, assuming Dillon was suffering with psychiatric issues. World War II created opportunities for people who were legally female. Dillon obtained work at a car dealership at Bristol. Meanwhile, testosterone began to change his body. In 1942, Dillon collapsed in the street and was taken to the Bristol Royal Infirmary. There he met a doctor who agreed to perform breast removal surgery. Dillon also obtained a letter explaining that his sex had been incorrectly recorded at birth. This allowed him to change his legal name and gender. Able to live freely as a man, he enrolled in a local college to study medicine. As the war ended, Dillon completed his studies in Bristol. He wrote a book titled Self, A Study in Ethics and Endocrinology, which even today is leading edge in its patient-centered approach in trans medicine. Dillon qualified as a doctor through Trinity College Dublin, and after being turned down for marriage to the woman he loved, Dillon joined the Merchant Navy, serving as a ship's doctor until 1958, when he was outed by the Daily Express. Unable to work, Dillon headed to India to explore his interest in Buddhism. The Buddhist leaders were reluctant to accept Dillon as they normally only admitted men. However, with patience and devotion, he finally became the first Western European to be ordained as a Buddhist monk. Unfortunately, India did not agree with Dillon. He became sick and died in 1962. A champion rower with 2 degrees and an ordained monk, Michael Dillon encapsulated body, mind, and spirit.
I'd like to now take this opportunity to hand over to Stephen Ireland, who is a key figure in our local community and does so much. I won't steal his thunder, and I'll hand over to him now. Over to you, Stephen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Fantastic, I can hear you now. Morning, welcome, over to you.
Thanks very much. Technology, eh? Well, Pride is not only about celebrating, but it's also about educating people and, of course, standing up in solidarity worldwide with the many countries that people are unable to be themselves. Even here in the UK, we face significant challenges still, but we are significantly moving on as a community. And it's with thanks to also allies, just like many of you, making a difference in your workplaces and the areas that you live. I've got to say, as the founder of Pride in Surrey, when I came up with the idea of Pride in Surrey, everyone said to me, you must be bonkers. This is going to be huge. Do you realise how big Surrey is? Do you realise how conservative their view is, etc., etc.? There were so many negatives. But me and my partner, we decided to battle on, and we came across some incredible people and have managed to build an organisation that is all about the community. So we started off life at as Pride in Surrey, and now we have moved and very adapted with COVID into Surrey LGBTQ Pride CIC, which is a community interest company. And the great thing about this is that we can do more as an organisation of volunteers for the community and recognise the amazing contribution that many organisations such as Surrey Police and Surrey County Council are putting into the LGBT community, but also recognising the intersectionality that exists amongst the community as well, and that's vital. In a year where we saw many challenges with Black Lives Matter and challenges with our trans community, individuals that were having problems with disabilities, we have to recognise that those people exist within the LGBTQ plus community. So Surrey LGBTQ plus Pride Online is all about celebrating those individuals and giving everybody, absolutely everybody, a platform, and sharing that same vision of Surrey County Council, that nobody is left behind. I was blown away that the first ever Pride event on August the 10th, 2019 saw so many individuals attend, but I was also amazed that we were awarded 2 awards just for being accepting of everybody, but also recognising everybody within the community. So we've carried that on and we'll continue with that message. So before I hand back over, just to really clarify what we're doing at Pride in Surrey now, or Surrey LGBTQ Pride Online, we've got to get used to that now. We have, well, really reshaped everything. We are committed still to having a Pride event. In our first year, we had 2. We've also opened a fantastic facility that when COVID has passed, the Pride pop-up shop and safe space in Woking's Peacock Shopping Centre. We've launched our Stop Hate campaign, thanks to the Surrey Police Crime Commissioner, David Munro, and his team, Spread Pride, Not Hate. And we also have our text to talk service where people in the community can text talk to 88440, and they will be connected to an individual who will listen and be able to connect them to the amazing charities that we have here in Surrey supporting so many individuals. Charities like the Samaritans, for instance, Mind, Woking, Catalyst, Mary Frances Trust, but also our LGBT Switchboard Alone, which is obviously Outline Surrey. And then we've got other organisations that are fantastic, like Trans Radio UK and Truck Listens. So within Pride in Surrey's umbrella, we've got our online arm, we've got Spread Pride, Not Hate. We've got our More Pride message, which is about doing more. And it's about standing up for what's right and recognising the challenges and continuing to challenge Number 10 and the Cabinet if there are problems, and working locally with the government. We've also got the Proud Show that's on Radio Woking, Surrey Hills Radio and Trans Radio UK each week, and shared to 137 network radio stations through the Radio News Hub network, which is fantastic. And we're going from strength to strength. And of course, the text to talk service and our brand new Text Sam service, which is about supporting those that are going through domestic abuse, because sometimes they are unable to pick up the phone and call. So we've launched a service where you can text Sam with any message to a specific number. And as long as you start the message off with Sam, we'll play along and connect you to Surrey Police and get you the help that you need. We're committed fully to doing all we can. And well, we can only do it with thanks to everybody's support in the community. But from me to Surrey County Council, especially, a huge thank you for the support that you showed us last year in your sponsorship. And we hope that that will continue. And of course, Surrey Police, when we met Clinton and the team all those years ago now, it felt like it was just going to be a small event, which then, well, as we know, blew up into this huge thing. And of course, all eyes are on us, but a huge thank you to you for your commitment to the community. And of course, we know that there's a rise in hate crime and we do need to stand up and recognise that, but there's a rise in reported hate crime because people are now feeling comfortable reporting it. And that's what we should celebrate. So final message from me then, whatever you do today is history tomorrow. Raise your glasses, this is only lemonade. To everybody in history for obviously doing what they did, but of course remember that we can make history too together. So cheers.
So Mr. Weston was born on the 29th of January 1978, and he was nicknamed the Devonshire Wonder. One of the best British field athletes in the 1920s, champion in the women's javelin throw and discus. Mark Weston was born with atypical genitals due to a disorder of sexual development and was assigned female at birth and raised as a girl. In April and May 1936, Weston underwent a series of corrective surgeries at the Charing Cross Hospital. After surgery, Weston changed his name to Mark and retired from competitions. In July 1936, Weston married Alberta Bray and they had 3 children. Following his example, his elder sibling Harry, previously known as Hilda, also changed his gender presentation in the 1930s. Sadly, Harry died by suicide by hanging while suffering from depression in 1942. Weston died in the Freedom Fields Hospital in Plymouth in 1978. And I just think you'll agree that snapshot there of a person, amazing sports person and inspiration to many.
I can't actually believe that the 2 hours is nearly up, but we are very, very lucky now to be joined by our keynote speaker, Mr. Peter Tatchell. So if I could hand over to Peter, please.
Well, first of all, a very happy LGBT History Month to all of you. And thank you so much for inviting me, and salutations to all the other panelists and their contributions. My starting point is, let's go back to once upon a time. Way back in 1972, the first ever UK Pride Parade took place in London. And it was so different from today. There are only about 700 of us. We marched from Trafalgar Square to Hyde Park. The event was very heavily policed. And not all police were hostile, some were fine, but there was a lot of homophobic slurs and anti-lesbian slurs against many of us on the route. But of course, since then, Pride has grown so big. So we had in the 1990s over 100,000 people on the Pride Parade. I think it took 5.5 hours to pass a single point. There were 300,000 people at the post-Pride party on Clapham Common. A huge explosion. And of course, today, we don't have one Pride, we have over 150 Prides taking place all over the country. And that is a testament to the strength and resilience and determination of our community to take our message everywhere. That we, LGBT plus people, we are everywhere, in every community, in every walk of life, every occupation, we are there. And that has done so much to help break down prejudice and ignorance. The evidence is overwhelming. If LGBT plus people come out, it does make a tangible difference, because people who know an openly LGBT plus person are much more likely to support LGBT plus rights, are much more accepting and understanding. So coming out is still so important. I think it's also important to remind ourselves that until 1999, Britain had by volume the largest number of anti-LGBT plus laws of any country in the world, some of them dating back centuries. So a law that sent Oscar Wilde to prison in 1895 and resulted in the chemical Alan Turing in 1952, that law, it was only finally repealed fully in 2003. But as I said, by 1999, the process of serious reform, beginning with the end to the ban on LGBT plus people in the armed forces, and then an equal age consent, the repeal of Section 28, an end to the ban on same-sex children, the outlawing of discrimination in the workplace, the advent of civil partnerships, the prohibition of the provision of goods and services, plus housing, education, and other aspects of life. And then, of course, 2013, the legalization of same-sex marriage. So in just the very short space of time of 14 years, from 1999 to 2013, every major anti-LGBT plus law had been repealed. That is the fastest, most successful law reform campaign in British history. And I want to take the opportunity to thank all of you and the countless thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of LGBT plus people across the country and our straight friends and allies for helping make that possible. We together did it. We in Britain have some of the best laws on LGBT plus rights of any country in the world. What a turnaround, what a fantastic change. And it isn't just laws. I mean, you go back to the 1980s at the height of the AIDS panic and hysteria, the height of Margaret Thatcher's family values and Victorian values campaign, and of course, the advent of Section 28. In the late 1980s, more than 2/3 of the British public said they believed that homosexuality was mostly or always wrong. Today, the figure is down to 16%. That's still more than 1 in 8 of the population, but nothing like the plus 2/3 majority back in the late 1980s. So it hasn't just been laws that have changed, it's also been public opinion. I want to just finish off by talking briefly about some of the issues that still remain to be resolved. We've just heard from Louise about the battle of trans people, and of course we still need to ensure that the Gender Recognition Act is reformed to allow trans people to self-ID without going through all the hoops and hurdles they had to in the past. That is just fair, it is just right. It works well in other countries, and it distresses me greatly that trans people are being demonized and posed as a threat to non-trans.
From Gavin Stevens in the chat.
You know, the battle for trans women's rights and the rights of other women, it's the same battle. It's against misogyny, it's against prejudice, it's against discrimination. And it's so important that all women, trans women and non-trans women, stand together to fight the common battle for their equality, dignity and respect. We also have a big current campaign that my foundation is organising called Stop Dithering. It's a campaign appealing to the Conservative government to fulfil its promise to end conversion therapy, to ensure there was a ban in place to not allow organisations to seek to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. These are deeply harmful, unethical, and ineffective practices that are being condemned by medical and psychiatric and counselling organisations in Britain and all across the world. So we've got a petition which is on my foundation's website, petertatchellfoundation.org, where we're going to send this petition to the government, urging them to fulfil their promise made in July 2018, more than 2.5 years ago, that they would ban LGBT plus conversion therapy. So please, if you are supportive, go to the website and sign the petition and get your friends to do likewise. We need to end this damaging practice. Another campaign we're working on is to compensate gay and bisexual men who were arrested and convicted under historic anti-gay laws. There are probably about 15,000 men still alive today who were prosecuted under anti-gay laws that have since been repealed. Many of these men went to prison, where they were sometimes badly beaten and abused, sometimes by both inmates and by prison staff. Those who were not imprisoned often suffered huge swingeing fines, which harmed them and damaged them financially. But in all cases, these men suffered the stigma of a criminal conviction for a consenting same-sex behaviour, which was not a crime for heterosexual men and women. And many of them lost their jobs, their homes, their marriages. Some suffered, or many suffered actually, extreme depression and anxiety. Some attempted and actually committed suicide. So we believe that those men deserve compensation for the suffering they endured. Another issue we're working on is to improve the asylum system, which is so rigged against applicants, particularly against those who are LGBT+. The rate of first refusal for refugees seeking asylum based on their sexual orientation or gender identity is much higher than for political, ethnic, or religious refugees. And mostly they only eventually win because they have the support of organisations like the UK Lesbian and Gay Immigration Group and my own Peter Tatchell Foundation. We think it's wrong that many of these people end up being incarcerated in asylum detention centres, which are basically prisons by another name. We also think it's wrong that those who are not incarcerated are forbidden to work and forced to live in substandard Home Office asylum hostels, often alongside other refugees who are deeply homophobic and who threaten and abuse them, and who are forced to live on less than £40 a week to pay for all their food, clothing, travel, mobile phone, everything. This is a system of institutional destitution against asylum seekers. And so that's our campaign, to try and improve their lot, to ensure that they are treated fairly and with dignity. Another issue is that although we have some fantastic equality laws now, nearly all these equality laws have written into them qualified exemptions for religious organisations, not just places of worship, so faith-run schools, hospitals, nursing homes, shelters for the homeless, and so on. Now, our view is, why should religious organisations be exempt from the law? They're the only organisations that have this exemption. And we think that discrimination is not compatible with any religious ethos, and therefore it should not be permitted. If religious organisations are providing a service, such as a shelter for the homeless or a nursing home, they should not be able to discriminate on the basis of a person's sexual orientation or gender identity, either in terms of staffing or in terms of the services they provide to people who need their help. We know that bullying in our schools is still a big issue. The most recent poll suggested that something like 45% of LGBT plus pupils in schools have been victims of bullying because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. That's almost half. When it comes to hate crime, we know that in the last 5 years, nearly a third of all LGBT plus people have been victims of hate crime, ranging from threats, abuse, insults, right through to actual physical assaults. And my foundation often deals with people who are being abused and terrorized by homophobic neighbors, with bricks through their windows, excrement pushed through the letterbox, things like that. I'm not saying it's widespread, but it does still happen. It absolutely wrecks lives. I know of 3 people that we've worked with in recent years who've ended up dying of heart attacks as a result of this terrorization. And I've got to say that often the police are not as on the ball as they could be. Often it's, you know, he says, she says. There's been, in a number of cases we've been aware of, failure by police services to give protection to those people who are being victimized by homophobic, biphobic, transphobic neighbors. The final point is that we have finally a commitment from the government to make relationship and sex education in schools mandatory and to make it LGBT plus inclusive. This has been a battle that I and others have fought for over 30 years, and now it's finally a reality. But sadly, because of coronavirus, it's been postponed in terms of implementation until next year. You know, we will get it, but one of the problems, or 2 of the problems that still remain, is the content of this LGBT plus education is not specified. So there's no mandatory guidelines for schools. So some will do it, you know, by tick boxing. You know, they'll just go through the motions and not do it very well. Others, of course, will do it well, and thanks to them. But it's not satisfactory that it's left really down to the whims and fancies of individual schools about how they do this LGBT plus education. The other issue, of course, is that religious schools are still going to be allowed to teach their own religious ethos, which in many cases is that homosexuality, bisexuality, and transgenderism are sinful, immoral, abnormal, and unnatural. It can't be right that schools, because of their faith, should be allowed to teach those ideas, because we know those kind of ideas have a great damaging effect on LGBT plus kids. So these are the battles we still have to fight. And I want to reiterate once again, thank all of you who've been part of this long walk to freedom. You have been such important allies and supporters. Without you, we would not be where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Tatchell. Absolute honour to have you present with us here today and share that with us. So thank you so much. From a heartfelt thanks from myself and everyone else on the line. I'm sure the work you've done in the history yourself personally and with the wider community allies is just incredible. So thank you for that. On that note, I'd like to send that thanks to all of our guest speakers. This event just wouldn't have been possible without you. And for those that shared personal stories, kudos to you. You're all a credit to Surrey Police and Surrey County Council. It's really been a privilege to be part of this event and host it today. It's been awesome to see it all come together. Yes, we should be proud of what we do, where we work, and the fact we do work for such an inclusive workforce and forward-thinking organisations. And what this really highlights to me, I think it's important for everyone and the message to share, it really doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, or what your background is. Actually, we all play our part, and this is all important to all of us for all the reasons we've discussed and could discuss for hours longer today. I'm really sorry this is not in person. We'd love to connect and see you all face to face, but clearly the pandemic has got in the way of that. That said, I think it's been a positive. It's made us work harder and smarter and be more agile. And actually, we've been able to reach a lot of people today. So thank you for all joining, and please spread the word. Again, we'd love to stay on and do a load of QA sessions and speak one-on-one. I think we could have some really great conversation. Sadly, we do not have the time. Hope that's something we can look to do in the future. It wouldn't be right if I finish without saying a personal thanks specifically to Farhan, who's been a massive key player and is a credit to Surrey Police and our inclusion team as the deputy. The work you do is amazing. You really are one of a kind, so thank you. And also to people in the background, Rachel Murphy here, logged on, coordinating everything, our comms department, Lucy Parsons lead. So many people I could thank personally, as well as all of our guest speakers. But yeah, thank you for putting this all together. And for our Chief Officer support on the line, it's great to see you here today, involved in this with us. And the same for yourself, Katie, from the Surrey County Council point of view. It's all of you that can help drive and create this change and be part of it. So a huge thanks. So from me, it's just really to say, stay safe, look after each other, and really keep smiling. Make sure you do your bit to educate out prejudice. And on that note, anything, I think you can see the t-shirt, but anything you do on social media platforms, please tag Surrey Police, Surrey County Council, and use that hashtag. Huge thank you. Speak to you all soon. And Farhan, over to you, mate, for the close.
So again, just from me as well, thank you very much to all of our speakers. Mr. Tatchell, thank you for agreeing to accept my social media hounding to finally get you to attend today. But I'm sure everyone has absolutely found what you said and what all of our speakers said today so inspiring. And I think the real key thing that comes out for me constantly, like James said, is education, education, education. The more we can inform, the more we can promote, whether it's in schools, colleges, workplaces, the better we can become an inclusive society and an organisation as well. So just going back to our 5 key people, I'd like us to end with our final face of 2021 LGBTQ+ History 2021, and that is an amazing lady, and her name was Maya Angelou. Marguerite Angelou was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1928, the child of a doorman and a nurse. She was given the nickname Maya by her older brother. After her parents' marriage broke down, she was taken to live with her grandmother. Later, aged 8, her father sent her to her mother, whose boyfriend abused her, and was murdered soon after. Shock made her mute for almost 5 years, but she developed a prolific memory and love of literature. Sent back to her grandmother, it was a beloved teacher who coaxed her to find her voice again. Maya's varied life is a perfect example of how a person can overcome personal and institutional adversity to discover their skills and succeed in life. The author of over 30 books and recipient of over 50 honorary degrees, she had many careers before becoming a writer, all before the age of 40. Time magazine pointed out in her 2014 obituary, Maya's jobs included cook, waitress, sex worker, dancer, actor, playwright, editor at an English language newspaper in Egypt, calypso singer, and the cast of the opera. She is best known for her 1969 memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, the first non-fiction bestseller by an African-American woman. Maya achieved many firsts: the first Black female cable car conductor, Hollywood's first female Black director, and the first Black woman to read her own poetry at a presidential inauguration, Bill Clinton's in 1993. Americans watched enthralled as she recited On the Pulse of Morning, which begins a rock, a river, a tree, and calls for peace, racial and religious harmony, and social justice for people of all different origins, incomes, genders, and sexual orientations. It won a Grammy. Given the importance of the Black Lives Matter movement, it seems appropriate to feature a writer who is clearly with and challenged both racism and homophobia. Her work has inspired so many writers and celebrities, including Oprah Winfrey and President Barack Obama, who presented her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the US in 2011.
You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Just because I walk as if I have oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my sassiness upset you? Don't take it so hard just because I laugh, as if I have gold mines digging in my own backyard. You can shoot me with your words, you can cut me with your lies, you can kill me with your hatefulness, but just like life, I'll rise. Does my sexiness offend you? Oh. Does it come as a surprise that I dance as if I have diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame I rise. Up from a past rooted in pain I rise. A black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling and bearing in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear I rise. Into a daybreak miraculously clear I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And so, wow. There I go.